Thank you. It's been bandied about that certain things are illegal, and I think it's worth a little bit of discussion over that. You know, inspector generals have been let go, people at the USAID have been let go, and it's been alleged that this is illegal. It's actually a little more complicated than that. This goes all the way back to Andrew Johnson and his fight with Congress. There was a tenure of office act that was passed, and it said that he couldn't even fire members of his cabinet. And they were in the same party. The Republicans controlled Congress, and Johnson at the time, I guess, had become a Republican, being Lincoln's vice president. But it was finally repealed, but there was a big dispute over the way he could even hire members of his cabinet. Later in 1926, in Myers versus the U.S., the court rules that you really can't restrict a president's right to hire and fire their cabinet. Now, it's gone beyond that. In 2020 or 2021, the CFPB that was referred to earlier, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Democrats created this, and they didn't want it ever to go away. The funding was supposed to go on forever, and the person in charge of it was not to be fired. Well, the court ruled that you can't do that. You can't set up an executive agency under the auspices of the president and say you can't fire them. So then there's a question with the inspector generals, and the Trump administration is challenging it, and I think we have to go with what the court decides, but there is legislation saying you can't fire them. He asserts that under the court precedents that he can, and so this is an argument. That's what constitutional law and separation of powers is about. So we'll find out whether it's legal or illegal, but at this point it's an allegation that it's illegal. With regard to the waste and abuse and the outrageous things that we're seeing, sure, it draws the attention. It should draw the attention. But there is also the question of where the money comes from. What we bring in tax revenue is equal to about 4 programs. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and food stamps would soak up all of the revenue. There's nothing left. So when we vote on a budget as Congress for military and non-military, what's called discretionary spending, which is a third of all spending, it's all borrowed. Nearly $2 trillion what we vote on, it's all borrowed. So this gets to the point that I'll ask both of you on foreign aid. If it's about $40 billion, do you think we could just get better people over there and they won't do the bad projects? Or do you think maybe they need a smaller number in order to have an incentive to cut out the waste? We'll start with Mr. Ruger, Dr. Ruger.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There's very little incentive for agencies to get lean when the money keeps coming through the door. In fact, even if you increase the aid, or the support rather, then why would they change? I think this is the case in almost every government agency out there, is that putting it on a diet means that it will actually work better. When the budgets are bloated, then you see some of these less prioritized or less important projects are not scrapped or subject to the same type of analysis in terms of their benefits relative to their costs that we would like to see. Okay. One thing I would like to say also is that given the potential for USAID and the State Department to pursue different and potentially contradictory goals, it's also good governance to actually try to find a different architecture that can make sure that the money that is spent is actually doing so for a common purpose and achieving a common end, as opposed to being potentially contradictory here. And that's one of the challenges that I think Secretary Rubio is trying to handle with this reform that he's already started down the path for.
Mr. Schellenberger?
Yeah, of course, I absolutely agree. You can't get efficiency if you have a big or growing budget. I think the other issue is that what is this money actually for? And I think the fact that they're putting it in State Department is correct. If this is about, our relations with foreign countries, encouraging the kind of governments we want, discouraging the kind of governments we don't want, you might call that regime change, that belongs in State Department. Even on things that seem innocent, like food aid, there's been a long literature of academic studies on really big driver of starvation and hunger in poor countries tends to be war. It tends to be used as a weapon of war. Countries that are so vulnerable that they depend on food imports and can't afford to replace them if the U.S. were to end those are countries that have a huge food sustainability problem. They have problems that go much deeper than just not getting that month's shipment of food from us. I think if we want to subsidize American farmers, that's a question that needs to be discussed, and economists and others can debate that. But I think this idea that somehow it's good to just dump food on poor countries has been shown to really be quite devastating in many cases, undermining the local farmers who are actually required to make those countries self-sufficient. So I think if we're really concerned about helping poor countries to develop, then we have to have an eye towards self-sufficiency and self-reliance and not just endless dependence on the United States.
Apparently, I'm the last person to vote, and they really want me to go vote. So I'm going to go vote, and nobody's here to object. I'm going to leave it open because there's one more senator coming, and she's going to gavel it closed when she gets here, Senator Ernst, and I'm going to let her ask questions for as long as she wants, and she gets to end it. But if you wouldn't mind sitting patiently, she wants to ask a few questions. Great.